What is going on, you guys?
What's up, everybody?
Y'all, we are back at it, and wintertime fishing is where it's at. So we're gonna hopefully give you guys the breakdown on lures, rods, what to use, how to retrieve, all that good stuff to get on the winter bite.
That's right. A lot of people think wintertime fishing, that's where you kind of put the boat up, put the rods in storage, wait till it gets warm again. But wintertime can actually is, in a lot of areas, some of the best fishing for what we're gonna talk about. Speckled trout, redfish, striper. You're probably gonna catch some of the biggest fish, definitely all the trophy speckled trout. A lot of them in our area, our fishery, are caught in the wintertime.
That's right.
So we're actually going into kind of like peak season for a lot of these fishes. So
yep, that late fall, early winter is like my favorite bite of the year. So I'm super stoked to hopefully give you guys some tips and tricks of what Jeff and I use on this channel to get on the winter species, and well, I guess they're all year-round species, but to get on the winter bite specifically, and hopefully give you guys a good breakdown of everything that you guys need. Head to the tackle shop, gear yourselves up, and get on out there. Go catch some fishies. So Jeff is actually gonna give you guys the lowdown. Here we go.
All right, y'all. So what we're gonna talk about first is, in this video, we're gonna talk about where to catch these fish. That's the first thing that I wanna talk about, is actual fishing spots. So we're gonna talk about kind of strategy, general approach to it. So then we're gonna talk about the baits, the lures, everything that we're gonna use. And then Christy is gonna show how to work these baits. So first place we're gonna start is where to catch these fish, where we're gonna be targeting. So these fish in our fishery in the mid-Atlantic, Virginia, North Carolina, but this also applies, same thing, all the way down the coast. So these fish are gonna be getting into their wintertime areas that they're gonna feel comfortable. And that's really gonna be the water temp. The other thing to consider is there's gonna be less bait, less options at the dinner table for the fish that are above on the food chain, the speckled trout, redfish, and striper, and that's the dolphin. So these fish are gonna be looking at, they're gonna be moving. So I'm right here, Rudy Inlet, Virginia Beach, and a lot of these fish, they're gonna be running down the coast. There's like two different migration patterns. There's gonna be fish moving down the coast, down to North Carolina, and they're gonna be going into the inlets, and they winter in Morehead City, and some of these fish even go all the way down to Murrel's Inlet, Myrtle Beach, and south of Myrtle Beach as well. But, so there's two different migrations. There's gonna be the fish moving down the beach, then there's gonna be the fish right here moving back into these creeks. So Christy will show you guys. This right here is Rudy Inlet, and Rudy Inlet is an example of an area that we wanna target these fish in the wintertime, because this inlet has a good amount of depth, and it has areas that these fish can hide from the dolphin, from flipper. So Rudy Inlet behind me is a great example of a wintertime fishery, because these fish can escape the dolphins. We have a few creeks back in here, but those creeks are also adjacent to some deeper water. And deeper water could be 10, 15, even 20 or more feet in the wintertime. So that's an area that we're gonna be targeting in the winter, is these areas that are adjacent to deep water, but are gonna be back in the creeks. They're gonna be back in these inlets. So we're gonna be fishing a lot of so these fish, as the water gets colder, their typical movement is gonna be pushing as far back as they can, but they're gonna be in areas that are gonna be adjacent to some deeper water. So those are gonna be some areas that we're gonna look for targeting these wintertime fish. These are gonna be some of the baits that we're gonna be looking at. And as I talk about the baits, I'm also gonna be talking about, you know, just different applications, and still talking about locations of where we're gonna fish these. So the two main lures that I'm gonna use in the wintertime are gonna be your standard jig, 1/4 ounce jig, and a heavy Dean mirrolure. This right here is a heavier mirrolure, so it's gonna have a faster sinking action to it, and it's got a smaller profile, but it sinks faster, so it's gonna get down to depth, because a lot of these fish, they're gonna be deeper. So that's where having a 1/4 ounce jig head or the mirrolure allows us to fish these baits appropriately. These fish, they're gonna be typically a little deeper, but they're gonna be slower. So the way that we're gonna fish this, Christy's gonna show you, but this allows us to fish a slower presentation, both of these do. And they allow us to get down to depth. So in the wintertime, this is what our tackle box looks like. We're gonna have a heavy ding. We're also going to have, this is the MR17, so it doesn't sink as fast on these warmer days where the fish do push up shallow. Then that's where we're gonna be using, this is the MR17. Your traditional just mirrolure XL, which is the MR27. A little bit faster sinking than the MR17, a little bit bigger profile. This is about the biggest profile that I'll use in the wintertime. Again, because these fish, their metabolism slows down a little bit. So they're not looking to eat massive baits. You know, so I just caught my personal best speckled trout on this little mirrolure. When I'm using jigs, it's kind of two different schools of thought there. Sometimes we're gonna use a heavy jig, like a 1/2 ounce jig. Other times we're gonna be using a lighter jig. So we're using the heavier jig where if we have a cooling pattern and it's like what we're about to go into next week where the high is gonna be like upper 40s, the low is gonna be into the 20s or 30s, that's gonna typically push those fish a little deeper. And when I mean deeper, they're gonna be 15 to 20, 30, sometimes even 40 feet, those speckled trout are gonna be. People down in South Carolina or Georgia think we're nuts because up here in the mid-Atlantic, we're targeting some of these fish really deep. And actually, some people in the Outer Banks are driving north so that they can catch our fish because it's better that we have deeper water up here in Virginia Beach. So we're gonna be using these heavier jigs so we can get down to 20 to 30 feet, but we're gonna be just a slow, steady retrieve, or we're gonna be jigging a lot slower. But that's why we're gonna have heavy jig heads in the tackle box, because these do get used quite a lot in the winter time, because we do want to get down to depth when it's a cooling pattern. You can also use a 1/8 or a 1/4 ounce jig head, which I have over here, but this is a 1/8 ounce jig head. This will also work in 15 to 20 feet or plus of water. It's just how patient can you be to allow this 1/8 ounce jig to sink down to depth. Once it gets down there, it's gonna be a slow, steady retrieve, but a 1/8 ounce jig head. So it's kind of two different schools of thought. You can go heavy, and that's really gonna be fishing, I would say 15 foot to 20 foot minimum. If you're fishing 8 to 15, maybe 20 feet, then you can get away with a 1/8 ounce. You just have to be more patient to make sure that that lure is getting down to depth, because a lot of these fish, the striper, speckled trout, and redfish, they're gonna be in that bottom third of the water column. Sometimes they will be suspended in the middle, but these right here are gonna be, I go from a 1/8 ounce, 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce is what we're gonna be using, or a 3/8 ounce. So this right here is pretty much the spread that we're using in the winter time. When it comes to soft plastics, we do have some no live bait needed jig heads. We do like these a lot. Their soft plastics are great. These are Z-Man, not no live bait needed, but we do really like the no live bait. But we really do like the no live bait needed jig heads. And just again, it's got a smaller profile, and that's another thing that we really do like in the winter time. So for striper fishing, obviously striper are a little bit more of a cold water fish than the speckled trout and redfish. So we will use some larger profile baits for the striper, but when we're targeting specifically speckled trout and redfish, then it's gonna be something a little bit more compact, like this no live bait needed jig head. So the soft plastics are gonna be, this is a diesel minnow for Z-Man, your just normal size Z-Man. So when it comes to colors, we like to use a little bit more natural presentation. We're not using stuff that's too bright. or too loud. It's just a little bit more natural. Again, the bites are gonna be more subtle. So that's where using live bait is great, but also this right here will get it done. Again, just a smaller profile, think slower, lower, and we're gonna be looking at areas, again, that are adjacent to some shallow water, to structure, to areas that these target species that we're after obviously need to stay alive. They need to be eating. So in the wintertime in our fishery, their food source tends to be, that's gonna be a lot of the mud minnows, that will be some mullet, things like that. But it's not gonna be like pinfish and, you know, just like your smorgasbord of like everything, like even shrimp that we have in the warmer months. So something that imitates more of like a smaller fish, like a mud minnow or a mullet, that's really what we're gonna be using in the wintertime. And then locations, that's what we're gonna be looking for, are gonna be areas that, you know, obviously that the mud minnows are gonna be in, or the smaller bait fish. And where those are gonna be typically in the backs of the creeks. There will also be areas that we're gonna look at that the fish, that the target species can come up shallow on a warmer day, and they can get warmth. So the back of a speckled trout, kind of like this Z-man, is darker so that they can actually take in more heat throughout the winter time. And you'll notice that it's like almost like a purplish hue on the back of speckled trout. And what that's gonna allow is the speckled trout on a warmer trending day, or on a warming trend, the trout will actually come up closer to the surface, and they'll kind of like sun, or they'll, you know, get more of that, more of the sunlight, and they'll kind of warm up. That will speed up their metabolism, and that will get them feeding more. So the areas that we're gonna be looking for to finding these fish, they are gonna be where's they're gonna be access to more consistent water temperature, and that's gonna be deeper water. And then where's there gonna be food and or protection from dolphins. So that's gonna be typically like a shallow flat that's adjacent to a drop off, that's adjacent to like right near, you know, 10, 15, 20 feet of water. This could also be some deeper docks. This could be in the backs of our creeks. You're still gonna have some fingers back there, and there's gonna be like drop-offs off the points of those. Those are gonna be some areas that we're gonna look at. So even like the floating docks that do retain heat, a rock wall, jetties, riprap, things like that, kind of like we're bass fishing. And honestly, that's in the wintertime. We're kind of like flipping and pitching docks sometimes, some deeper docks, because those fish are gonna be looking for structure as well if there's dolphins around. So they're gonna be right around these docks. But we wanna look for docks that do have some depth to them. So again, hard plastics, the Heavy Dean, the MR18, smaller profile, allows us to work this slower and lower where the fish are gonna be. If they're up shallow, we can still, you know, kind of keep our rod tips up, or we're gonna be using the MR17 right here. So two great wintertime baits. And then moving over into the jig world, we've got the two different approaches. Heavier jigs could use a larger profile there, where we're gonna be fishing, you know, 20 to 30 feet plus, and it's just gonna be more of a slower retrieve. Or we're gonna be using a 1/8 ounce jig head if it's gonna be in that 6 to 8 or 10 feet of water, and we want that really slow presentation. That's a really big thing in the wintertime, is that we do want just slow and low. So the 1/8 ounce jig head allows us to fish that really well in the wintertime. All right, so that's what we're gonna be using in our tackle box. And those are some of the things we're gonna be looking for to locate the fish. Christy now is going to show y'all how to fish these.
All right guys, so Jeff just did a really great job at breaking these down, and I've got a Heavy Dean tied on. This is honestly my favorite lure to fish all winter long, to get on redfish, trout, and striper. All right, so you've got your MR18, which is what is tied on. So I'm trying to get in the family room. And so for me, how I like to work this, again, this is really slow, is maybe you give it like a 5-second fall rate, and then you're gonna kind of twitch it. You guys aren't fishing like for Spanish mackerel, which you're gonna be a lot more active. So once you give it a few, like 3 to 5 second fall rate, I might twitch. Or even just one little twitch. Again, these fish are really tired. It's the winter, it's a totally different pattern for fishing, so they're not super active. They're not trying to feed on big meals. So I might twitch and then let it sink for 5 seconds.
The other thing that you can do with the mirrolure is you can also do a very slow, steady retreat.
Yeah.
Very slow retreat. And also is keeping your rod tip. Sometimes you can keep your rod tip up if it is a little shallower, if it's like 4 to 5 feet. If it's deeper and we want that mirrolure to get way down the depth, and that's where you can keep your rod tip down. The things that we like fishing a jig is just how versatile that it is in the wintertime, because in the winter, you're gonna be searching a little bit more. These fish are gonna be compacted. If they're gonna be in the middle part of the water column sometimes, for striper, trout sometimes will be positioned in the middle part of the water column, and redfish. But the jigging allows you to cover a little bit more water in the column. So it's not more linear. You're able to kind of, again, have a little bit, so you're able to have some of that yo-yo motion, so you can cover more water in the column. But if you are gonna be jigging, it's just gonna be more subtle jigs, just like this. And we're reeling it in very slow, just like this. Barely keeping it off the bottom. Again, that's why that 1/8 ounce jig head or a lighter. Some of my buddies even use a 1/16 ounce jig head, and they're fishing in 15 or 20 feet of water, just because that's what we're going for, is just more of that subtle motion. What we're trying to present is a very, very easy meal for these fish, because they need as much enticing as possible when their metabolism is slow. So it's just these very subtle jigs, just like that. Hopefully y'all like that video, and we'll be doing more of these tutorials throughout the winter time.